Hey everyone! Today, let's take a trip into the Cold War, a time when the world was scared of nuclear war, and two superpowers fought not directly, but through others. There were two major wars that shaped this era: the Korean War and the Vietnam War. They were not the same, but they had something in common. They were brutal, confusing, and full of questions. Let me ask you 6 simple ones. Why did the Korean War start just 5 years after World War II? Why couldn't the US and its allies stop North Korea, even with planes and tanks? Why is Korea still divided, and technically still at war? Why did America fight in Vietnam, a small country far from home? Why couldn't they win, even with powerful bombs and modern weapons? What did these wars do to the American people? If you've ever wondered about these questions, keep watching. This is the story of two Cold War wars that changed the world forever. Part 1. What was the Korean War? The Korean War began in 1950. It was a fight between the North, supported by China and the Soviet Union, and the South, backed by the United States and the United Nations. Before this, Korea was one country. But after World War II, it was split, the North became communist, and the South was supported by the West. On June 25, 1950, North Korea invaded South Korea. This was the beginning of a 3-year war. Why did the US join the Korean War? America didn't want communism to spread in Asia. They believed in the domino theory: if Korea fell, maybe Japan or Taiwan would be next. The US joined under the UN flag, sending troops and weapons. At first, it looked bad. North Korea almost took over the South. But then, something bold happened. Incheon landing. In September 1950, General Douglas MacArthur led a surprise landing at Incheon. It worked. The US pushed North Korea back, almost to the Chinese border. But then, a new force entered the war. What did China do? China warned the US not to get too close. The US ignored it. Then, in late 1950, hundreds of thousands of Chinese troops crossed into Korea. They used human wave tactics, big numbers, fast movement. US and UN troops were shocked. They were pushed back. The war turned into a long, freezing, painful fight. Stalemate and armistice. By 1951, the war reached a stalemate. Both sides kept fighting, but no one could win. The war ended in 1953 with an armistice, not a peace treaty. Even today, North and South Korea are still technically at war, divided by the DMZ. What was the Soviet Union's role? The Soviet Union never sent troops, but they gave weapons, training, and secret pilots to North Korea and China. Their help stayed hidden, so it wouldn't become World War III. What did the Korean War do to America? It showed that the Cold War was not just about words. It could turn into real fighting. It was also the first time US soldiers fought under the UN flag. Over 36,000 American soldiers died. But the war built a strong U.S. South Korea alliance that still exists today. Part 2. What was the Vietnam War? The Vietnam War began in the 1950s and lasted until 1975. It was between North Vietnam, supported by China and the Soviet Union, and South Vietnam, supported by the United States. It was part of the Cold War. America feared that if Vietnam became communist, other countries would too. Again, the domino theory. Why did America go to war? At first, the US sent money and advisors. But in the 1960s, they sent hundreds of thousands of soldiers. They believed they were fighting for freedom and democracy. But the war was not like World War II. It was fought in jungles, against an enemy that hid underground, the Viet Cong. This was a guerrilla war. What about the bombs and B-52? The US dropped more bombs on Vietnam than in all of World War II. They used B-52 bombers, giant planes that dropped tons of explosives. They bombed roads, forests, and villages. This was called a scorched earth strategy. But even with all the bombs, they couldn't win. Why couldn't America win? 1. The Viet Cong never gave up. They knew the land and used traps, tunnels, and surprise attacks. 2. South Vietnam's government was weak and corrupt. Many people didn't support it. 3. American people lost faith. Back home, people saw the war on TV, dead soldiers, burning villages, crying children. Protests exploded across the country. Young people didn't want to fight. Some burned their draft cards. The country was divided. How did the war end? In 1973, the US pulled its troops out. In 1975, North Vietnam took over the South. Vietnam became one country, communist. More than 58,000 Americans died, and millions of Vietnamese. What did the Vietnam War do to America? The Vietnam War left deep scars. People began to question the government. They stopped believing everything they were told. Soldiers came home, but many felt forgotten, angry, or broken. This is why many say, nobody really won the Vietnam War. The Korean and Vietnam Wars were different, but both were part of a bigger fight. The Cold War. In Korea, the fighting stopped but never really ended. In Vietnam, the fighting ended, but it left behind a broken country and broken hearts. These wars teach us that military power alone is not always enough. You need clear goals. You need support. And sometimes you need to know when to stop. If you found this video helpful or eye-opening, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment below. What surprised you the most, Korea's never-ending war? Or how Vietnam changed America forever? Let me know. I read every single comment. See you next time for more stories that shaped the world.